Well, thank you very much indeed, and to the organisers of this wonderful colloque. And it's on the orders of our master, Laurent Lebon, that I'm speaking this morning when I should have spoken on Thursday. So I apologise because it's yet another intervention that you were not expecting. Because time is very short, and this is a very large subject, I'm going to focus just on Picasso's cubist constructions in cardboard, beginning with violon. Dominating the composition is the base of a smartly finished cardboard box that probably once contained candy. The brutal cut that stands for one of the violin's F-holes demonstrates that the box is hollow, like the body of a real violin. But the empty space inside the box remains mysterious, the F-hole acting as a keyhole through which we long to peer. Might there be something concealed inside? Picasso was purposefully exploiting the curiosity that boxes naturally arouse. The two strips of paper, which represent the strings and bridge the gap between the top of the box, and the collage of faux bois and newspaper that form the impacted lower stratum, reiterate the theme of spatiality. But the space flowing around them is not mysterious. It holds no secrets. With violon, Picasso made a point of the sculptural character of the cardboard box, for it's the box that converts the collage into a high relief, and I have no problems, I have to say, in regarding relief as sculpture. And he gave space, both enclosed and open, a leading role in its conception and realization. Space instead of sculpture's usual mass. Now, I suspect that it was in 1909 that it began to dawn on Picasso that boxes provided the model for a new kind of sculpture. A sculpture that is like architecture in its cubic form and in its articulation of pockets of space. When he made drawings in which a wooden tea caddy is juxtaposed with various other things, here with the head of Fernande and with an apple. Both the apple and Olivier's head generated analytical cubist sculptures that resemble excavations, as if Picasso wanted to probe to the inner hidden core. But in 1909, he did not attempt to sculpt a box. Modeling a box in clay or in plaster, or carving it from solid wood, would have contradicted its nature as a hollow container. Stymied, he stopped making sculpture altogether. Now, as you all know, the brilliant imaginative leap came some 3 years later via sketches like this one, in which Picasso realized that sculpture need not be modeled or carved, and need not be solid or weighty, and that paper, cardboard, and string were valid sculptural materials. He'd also realized that objects, such as violins, which you see here, he also realized that objects such as violins were as valid subjects for sculpture as the human figure, which is seen otherwise in the other drawings. A conceptual breakthrough whose importance I don't think has ever been sufficiently recognized. We can't gauge how large a part Braque's lost paper sculptures in still life subjects played in Picasso's breakthrough because we don't have a detailed description, let alone a photograph, of any of those sculptures that Braque made supposedly in 1911, as early as 1911, 1912. But it's very likely that a combination of artisanal sources and childhood activities were also inspirational. And this is where I come to my cardboard boxes. Ready-made cardboard boxes became absolutely ubiquitous during the second half of the 19th century. Although at first France lagged behind the United States and Britain in fully mechanized mass production, she led the field in the luxury market, as I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn. Smaller boxes of complex construction that were finished by hand and designed for expensive items. A huge workforce, mainly female, assembled these boxes using all sorts of fancy papers to cover and to line them, some working in atelier, some working at home. Various in the Vaucluse, what you see here, workforce in there, was a major centre of production, and it has a museum devoted entirely to cardboard, which I haven't yet visited, unfortunately. But professional, successful firms had houses in Paris, outlets in Paris. Intrigued by this combination of three-dimensional form and decorative pattern, in January 1913, Picasso recycled the lid of a shallow lingerie box from Au Bon Marché, exploiting the passé Art Nouveau lettering of the label and the smart contemporary style of its striped livery. And I found a photograph of a similar box through the internet. As a child, Picasso was famed in his family for his dexterity with scissors and paper, and a couple of charming silhouettes of a dove and a dog survive from that period. But I suspect he probably, like all of us, made castles with cards, houses of cards, like the children, the boys in Chardin's paintings. He had that expertise with paper, not only cutting out, but modelling. And it's likely, and I can't prove it, however, that he constructed three-dimensional models in paper and pasteboard, since this was highly recommended as an entertaining way to introduce children to geometry and to develop their manual and cognitive skills and their comprehension of the world around them. Illustrated manuals proliferated during the 19th century. 2 volumes by the German follower, really, Bernhard Heinrich Blascher, aimed at children, were translated from the original German into English and French, and went through various editions, some confusingly appearing under the names of their translators. I'm showing you one of the French translations, where you see that it's recommended that this modelling in paper or in cardboard should be done by young people of both sexes. Beginning with the simplest task of all, the construction of a box or a box-like object, Blascher progressed to increasingly complex models of turreted buildings. He provided these plans, and you see the first plan is for a box-like piece of furniture here. Constructing boxes was also typically the first task in the cartonnage section of do-it-yourself manuals. And I'm grateful to Claire Le Thomas' thesis on these manuals. According to Henri de Graffigny, nothing could be simpler, and I've shown the bit of text here that I'm sort of summarizing from his manual. According to Henri de Graffigny, nothing could be simpler than transforming a sheet of cardboard into all sorts of objects. The only tools required were a penknife, a pair of scissors, a few pins, and a pot of glue, sort of materials that Picasso used, of course. And you didn't have to be an expert in geometry to construct cubes, pyramids, cones, and so on. Henri Blachon, author of a manual contemporary with the beginnings of Cubism, also recommended beginning with a regular cubic box. Here, Fig 93. And he provided plans which, unlike Graffigny's, illustrate the reinforcing flaps that had to be glued or pinned down. The resonant words modeler and construire recur repeatedly in these manuals. In the short MoMA film demonstrating exactly how Picasso made the first pasteboard and string guitar of October 1912, Scott Gerson drew attention to the box-like character of the central rectangular section with its reinforcing flaps. And you can see this film on YouTube. It is, in fact, like a box in the making. It's not finished, as it were. Some of the flaps have not been glued down. The curvaceous front here, corresponding to the back as well, can be seen as a lid. Curvy boxes of irregular shape belong to the realm of luxury, hand-finished packaging, but they were not a rarity at all. Cylindrical boxes, the notorious sound hole here, were also commonplace. And you see in Blachon's a plan for such a box. Indeed, the guitar's curved fingerboard here can be seen not only as a half cylinder, but also as a narrow cylinder in the making. Within a few months, a few months later, Picasso incorporated guitar into a wall-mounted still life. He used part of a large, ready-made cardboard box for the circular tabletop. It was a typically opportunistic move, but it also was, I think, a revealing statement of concept, process, and I would argue, debt. Constructions that were created in the immediate aftermath of guitar pay homage to the box as a sculptural form, and one could be forgiven for thinking that recycling was involved in both these constructions. You might think that this area and this area were, in fact, ready-made boxes that he appropriated, but in fact, those components were made by Picasso himself. Of the two, the Stuttgart Violin is closer to the first guitar in that it was made from relatively few separate components, and it exhibits its structure and methods of manufacture as frankly as a model maker's kit. You could imagine it being made of components like these forms here in Blach's manual. The crayon markings at the side, here and here, of course, suggest three-dimensional form, but they also describe the profiles that preceded cutting out by Picasso. The manual operations involved in cutting, assembling, and stringing this object were not demanding, and the authors of the manuals would have been absolutely horrified by Picasso's apparently slapdash standards, the messiness, etc., of an area like this. With wry humor, he was simultaneously imitating and distancing himself from his artisanal source. Guitar, by contrast, is bricolé in an ad hoc manner, much closer to modeling than to kit building. Picasso used wire, newspaper, and fabric at the back, to patch it together and to reinforce its rickety structure. He was improvising freely, and he could not have replicated it in the way he replicated MoMA's cardboard guitar in sheet metal, or as he could have replicated the Stuttgart Violin. But although it's inept by craftsmanly standard, guitar relies upon the techniques of the agile box maker, cutting, folding, pleating, lining, gluing, tying, and he exploits the spatial complexities of the so-called boîtes de fantaisie, with their tiers, their compartments, their drawers, their lids, their folding flaps. Boxes, when explored and understood as many-chambered buildings, were a match sculpturally for the human body, and I think that's one of Picasso's extraordinary perceptions. Cardboard dominated the packaging industry, but wood and tin still played a prominent part. There's no time to pursue this part of the story, but Picasso did, of course, recycle tins, as you know, and crates in other constructions. And I'm just mentioning one, Violon et bouteilles sur une table, which was largely constructed with rough boards from a dismembered crate, but it still retains its box-like character in certain areas like this here, wherever the boards meet at right angles to each other, you have that recollection of the box. And of course, his love affair with the box continued well beyond the Cubist period, resuming whenever construction was his principal sculptural process. The most flagrant later example being the famous crate head of 1958, which is, of course, here now in the exhibition, which is, of course, principally a crate with its lid removed and its cavity revealed. Thank you.